I work at GSK in global regulatory affairs. So obviously GSK is a pharmaceutical company. And within that, regulatory affairs are the people that ensure that our drugs have the proper approvals from regulators, right? So the day job is working in global regulatory affairs. And I've been at GSK about coming up to 13 years, so quite a long journey. But prior to that, I was an academic scientist. So as I was growing up, my mum was a nurse, my dad was an engineer, but my mum was working in the NHS and faced racism all the time. You know, she had people very much telling her, don't touch me because of the color of your skin. She struggled to progress up the career ladder, etc. And when I watched her when I was a young girl, I always hoped that by the time I grow up, that would not be the case today. And what I've realized through my journey is actually some of those struggles that existed 20 years ago still exist today. And you know, one of the mantras that you grow up with as an ethnic minority is that you must work twice as hard to achieve the same level of success. Now, I thought this was very much a narrative that existed in my family because of my mum's experience. But actually what I've realized is I hear this all of the time from other ethnic minorities.
So one of the things which would be nice to start with is to understand, you know, as an ethnic minority yourself, or maybe what you've noticed around you, what have been some of the kind of barriers that you find that, you know, ethnic minorities face in the workplace?
So I went to university to do an applied biochemistry degree, did a Ph.D. in molecular biology, and then worked as an academic at Imperial College for a couple of years. And then at the end of my postdoc at Imperial, I started applying, and I found out that I really could not break into pharma. And part of the reason for that barrier was because they said, you're too much of an academic. And it took quite a lot of gaining experience in kind of establishing what does pharma need by networking with industry partners. And it took me like 7 years of struggling to kind of establish some links, inroads in, to then break into GSK. And once I came into GSK, I had a pretty spectacular rise through the ranks in the initial stages. So I came in pretty much entry-level role, and within 4 years, I was part of the leadership team. Within 6 years, I became a director within as head of EU and EMAP and Stifel Regulatory Affairs. So once I came into GSK, I thought, this is great. You know, there is no glass ceiling within GSK. Applying for the next roll up, and realized that it was really difficult. And the sort of mantra I heard at that point is, you've only got regulatory experience. And I thought, really, is that true? Because I've just come from another sector with a whole host of experience in another sector. And I took the feedback on board. I decided to work in different parts of GSK. And I came in with all of this experience and started applying for jobs, and I still couldn't get a role within GSK. So I started then starting to really look around, read about this, talk to my fellow ethnic minorities about whether they were struggling. And I came across the fact that they have employee resource groups where employees for different races come together to kind of talk about some of their concerns and share their mutual experiences. So I got involved with Embrace Employee Resource Group at GSK about a year and a half ago. And it became very apparent through reading about things that are going on in the UK. So we have something called a race report that was published by the Business in the Community that looks at many corporate companies. And it looks at the kind of barriers that are faced by individuals who are trying to progress in companies. And they point out that one of the significant barriers is actually in career rising up to the higher ranks in any organization in the UK, where you see a real fall in the number of ethnic minorities that can climb the ladder to those very senior roles within an organization. And that kind of problem arises because of a couple of issues, right? There are certain ways that hiring happens into those higher grades. And ethnic minorities, we know, generally have less sponsorship. They have less kind of access to those kinds of people who help pull their careers up. That's one of the barriers. Another barrier could simply be not understanding what's expected at those levels because they haven't got the right mentors in place. And also, there's some things about the hiring process itself that can act as a barrier. So humility is something that we're taught in ethnic minority cultures. But in an interview, that's what we're expected to do, right? We're supposed to blow our own trumpet. And that's a common issue that a lot of ethnic minorities face. So those few barriers exist, some of which we can control, some of which the institution needs to help change.
That was going to be how, what are kind of some practical things that people could do to try to address these issues. So probably around those things you mentioned, what could be like, when you notice these things happening, what's a good way to try to overcome them?
So mentoring is absolutely key. If you haven't got a mentor, get yourself a mentor. It doesn't even have to be somebody within your department that you're working in. It could be someone in a different part of the organization, or it can even be somebody through LinkedIn. Find someone who's working in the area that you aspire to work in and reach out to them. Actually making those connections are really invaluable because you will learn from somebody else's experience. But other things is just awareness. I mean, you guys as Warwick MBAs are going to go, in a few years, are going to be leading a lot of these organizations, right? You're going to be working with those senior leadership teams. So having some awareness of these issues and looking around to see how diverse are the companies that we're working in. What can we do to change this? I mean, what we need here is societal change, right? And societal change doesn't happen if there's one or two people talking about this. We need not just Black and brown people talking about this. We need allies. We need people of all colors, all race, to talk about equality. We're talking about making it equitable for everybody, making sure there's access to equal opportunity. So if you see a part of a leadership team that is not diverse, question it, whoever you are, to say, do we have, and diversity is not just race diversity, I mean, gender diversity, I mean, do you have LGBTQ representation? Do you have disabled individuals coming in? And if you don't see any of those underrepresented groups, marginalized groups, then ask people in leadership positions what they're doing about it.
Inclusion. So Olga asks, what best practices to raise inclusion have you experienced in your career journey?
Some companies are further along this journey, might already have an infrastructure in place, and they might already be working. But if you join a company where there's more work to do in inclusion, then it starts with you raising your hand about looking to see if there's an employee resource group where you can come together with the force of other employees in order to bring this to the attention of leaders, to see if they have specific programs in place for talent. So they might put a leadership program in place for women. At GSK, we're starting to look at a talent program for ethnic minorities globally. So aspirational targets has really worked for the gender agenda to ensure there's enough female diversity, right? So again, putting aspirational targets in place for ethnic minorities is not a bad idea. Get involved, be brave about getting involved and voicing concerns and trying to teach your peers about why things are important. If you're an ally, it's equally important that you're curious and find out and raise your voice, because you might be in more of a position of power. You might have a voice that other people are willing to listen to.
Right? Working in the charity mental health sector, they find that it's all majority white female between 25 to 50, and kind of the applicants are the same. So how do we mix things up a bit?
So generally speaking, if your adverts are written a certain way, it won't be attractive to attract diverse candidates. Firstly, if you're using images with just white employees, it's not going to attract ethnic minorities who might think, am I going to have to struggle to get in? If your suppliers are not being told that this is important, the people you source your candidates from, where are you advertising? That's important. The talent exists everywhere. You just have to go out and look for it.
So they say that you alluded to the fact that networks play a big part in getting hired / promoted. do you think us ethnic minorities therefore tend to leave ourselves shortchanged by not having a diverse network?
Absolutely. I think networking is really, really important. And I think, I can't remember now which report, but I read some report that said the vast majority of ethnic minorities know networking is important, but we are reluctant to do it. If networking is valuable, we need to invest time in it. And building a network really helps, because you might come across those one or two influential people in your company who can really pull you up.
Another issue that I've seen is that sometimes groups that can be considered minorities in an organization, like women, for example, they can perfectly understand lack of diversity when it comes to them. But then when you talk to them about race, they don't understand the same issues about race. So do you know of any examples how you can transfer this kind of empathy and understanding in that scenario?
That's a fantastic question, Olga. Absolutely fantastic question. So what I tend to do is I try and bring in the things that have worked in the gender equation and say these changes will lead to, the stuff we did right for gender will apply in the race equation as well. All of these things that we have to do to let women in, so things like maternity pay and parental leave and flexible working, are now the standard, right? It's helped all people.
I'm going to ask a question from Tina. Have you got any specific positive / negative moments that stuck in your mind about being a minority and it made you realize you had a platform to voice your opinion?
I'll tell you about a negative moment that made me realize that I need to do something about it. So I went for a job where I was given feedback at the end of the role to say, you're great technically, we can really see you're determined, you can do the job, but you don't have the gravitas to sit around the leadership table. Now, for me, that was, I could have walked away from it going, they're probably right. But how do you measure gravitas? What is gravitas, And I also didn't particularly believe that feedback, because outside of the setting, I work with a charity where I'm interacting with CEOs, and I'm sitting on as a board of trustees group. So I'm already working as a leader in a different setting. So I knew that this was biased feedback, which was very subjective. And when you hear feedback that is subjective, challenge it. And companies should be using objective feedback or criteria for choosing you.
You mentioned that all this hard work does pay off, and again, congratulations to you for being recognized on the 2020 Empower role model list. So wanted to understand what it means. What is this role model list? What does it mean to be on it, and how kind of has it changed you since you've been on it?
It's a good question. So with this sort of tag of role model, it does come with a sense of responsibility, right? That you need to drive some positive change, really live up to that name. So for me, the recognition was as a result of some of the work that we're doing in Embrace. So for me, being a role model is really about kind of voicing and speaking up for those people who can't, for whatever reason. And also, for me, what it really means is, this award is a one-year award, right? But I want that 15 minutes of limelight to actually mean or result in some lasting change. So personally, what I've done is taken that kind of recognition and decided that mentoring, as I talked about, is key for helping those in marginalized communities who may not have access to a mentor. So a quick way of being able to mentor young kids, particularly, who might be looking to move into the corporate sector. I've kind of created a YouTube channel, and I've posted some quick 2-minute videos to try and help individuals kind of go who might be struggling with interview experience, who might be struggling with CVs and that kind of thing, to give people some tools that they can use. So I'm hoping that sort of practical help might be my legacy of being an Empower role model.